that now sharing as? Is that now sharing as a slideshow, Catherine?
Yes, it is. Yes, it's on the slideshow. So,
is it doing anything?
I haven't seen the. Yeah, there we are. We've got the title now. Sleep.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. technical. I apologise. Right. Okay. So as you can see, we're going to be looking at children across the age range. So starting with babyhood and moving through childhood into adolescence. So, and has that moved to aims and objectives?
Yeah, they're coming in.
Okay, so the aims and objectives of the session are to understand normal sleeping behaviours for the 0 to 19-year-olds and the influence of the developmental stages of their life in this, to gain an awareness of sleeping patterns in children with additional needs and where there may be differences and where there may not. Consider sleeping challenges that may arise for children and young people, their causes and the impact of those. Identify strategies and solutions to support good sleep behaviours and hygiene through the ages. And become confident in accessing valid resources. And when I understand this, probably for you, one of the most important things is where do you get that information to help you to support those conversations with parents or young people around their sleep. So they'll be through Just One Norfolk and wider agencies, and we've got a link of resources at the end, and we've also got a short tour of Just One Norfolk to show you where you can best access that information. We're going to start with what do you already know? Over to Catherine.
Okay, so just a very short quiz or a few questions here. So if you want, we'll just put the questions up and then we'll go through some answers. So when should a baby start sleeping through the night? From the beginning. And next question. So do you know what percentage of young children have sleep problems? And how many hours sleep do you think a 14-year-old should be having? So just hold that question in mind, because we've got a subsidiary question to that coming up in a second. Do you know how many sleep cycles that we have in one night? And how much of our life do you think we spend actually sleeping? And back to the 14-year-old, how much do you think the average teenager is actually getting at the moment? So we've, as there's lots of you here today, I'll just run through some answers with you all. So when should a baby start sleeping through the night? So the answer to this is really when a baby's ready. There's no particular age that the baby should start sleeping through the night, but it's very much around that individual child, their disposition, and when they're ready. We kind of expect it probably from 18 months onwards, but it is very much down to the individual child. So I don't know what your answers were for what percentage of young children have sleep problems, but we know that it's around 50% of young children that have sleep problems, and in teenagers we think it's about 40%. So hopefully you've got something like that for that question. How many sleep cycles do we have in one night? So I don't know if any of you know the answer to that, but it is we have 5 or 6 sleep cycles. Each sleep cycle lasts about an hour and a half, and in those sleep cycles we go through different levels of sleep, from lighter sleep into deeper sleep. But each of those cycles is very important to our quality of sleep that we get each night. So how much of our life do we spend sleeping? I was quite amazed at the answer to this. It's actually a third.
Should people have a guess?
Oh yeah, should we have a guess? Probably
yeah.
That's the answer there. I can't see the chat though, so I don't know. Anybody wants to put it in the chat?
Or in the chat. How much of your life do you think you spend sleeping?
So someone said 50%, 40%. I can see some chats coming through, a third. 40%, 25. Okay, actually, I think everybody's on track. Actually, it is about a third. So between about 26 to 32 years, when you put it into years, that's a lot of time, isn't it? It's quite a significant amount of time, but actually very important that we actually do get enough sleep. Thank you, everybody. So the last question: how many hours sleep should a 14-year-old be having? People could put that in the chat as well. That did work quite well, actually. How many hours should a 14-year-old be having? Oh, we've got 10, 12, 9, 8, some 9s and 10s, 11, yep, 9, 8 to 10. Yep, so those of you are saying around about 9 hours, that's about right. 9 hours is about the average that a 14-year-old should be having. But how much sleep do you think our average 14-year-olds are actually getting in 2021? Okay, yeah, we got some 6s, 7s, much less. 6, 7, yeah, absolutely. The average 14-year-old is getting about 6.5 to 7.5 hours sleep. Or someone's put 4, and probably some are getting as little as 4 hours. So yeah, and that goes for not just 14-year-olds, but generally adults as well, not getting as much sleep as we should. Wonderful.
We're going to look now at sleep through the ages. So you can see here from this diagram that this is the expected amount of sleep that we would need to remain healthy. And we don't just mean physically healthy here, we're talking about emotionally healthy as well. So a baby of 0 to 3 months, that would be quite normal for them to sleep 14 to 17 hours in any 24-hour period. Not continuously, obviously, but in long periods of sleep with short periods of, waking for feeding, etc. By 4 to 11 months, that will have reduced to 12 to 15 hours. As they move towards toddlerhood, 1 to 2 years, they're looking at 11 to 14 hours a night. At 3 to 5 years, they're going to 10 to 13 hours. And by the time they get to that 6 to 13 hour age range, then we're looking at 9 to 11 hours. And as Catherine has said, from the age of 14 upwards, we'd be expecting children to have 9 hours of sleep a night to stay, sorry, I couldn't do a word like that, to stay well. Okay, so, and I think actually when you look at that, what you can see is there's, you still need a really good night's sleep when you're a school-aged child, but it's usually in that 6 to 13 age range that perhaps some bad habits start to be introduced or some issues within the bedroom space, and that can heavily impact on the amount of sleep the children are having. Catherine.
Yep, so just to expand a bit more on the amount of sleep. So as we said, for babies, probably from around 12 months, they might start sleeping through the night, but that's not the case for all. And it's, very much about the individual child. And sometimes, parents' expectations can be quite high, expecting their child to start sleeping through the night. And if they're not, then that's not necessarily a problem. And sometimes it's about managing those expectations of parents. So sleep is a time of separation from the parent, and with separation comes anxiety in young children. It's a stage that they have to go through and learn that separation from the parent can be safe, and it's okay to be separated from their parent. And that anxiety peaks at around 12 to 18 months, but obviously can rise with stressful events in a child's life. And if young children perhaps haven't been able to separate securely and safely from their parent, and they still feel very anxious about that separation, that's where we talk about children developing a separation anxiety, and that can then really impact on them when they come to school age, start school, and that can be an issue. And if they're having those issues at night, they're not sleeping well at night because they're anxious about being on their own in their room. Perhaps they're still reliant on the parent coming and sleeping with them in their room or going into the parent's bed. Then that's affecting their quality of sleep. And all these things will have a knock-on effect then on perhaps their behaviour and how they're coping in the day. Sleep patterns can be affected by things like growth spurts. When a child has a growth spurt, they might have some sleep regression and start waking up. Illness, obviously, if they've got a temperature, they're feeling poorly, that will affect how well they're sleeping. And they might be waking up quite often in the night, needing comfort from the parent. Obviously, changes in family life or routine, so moving house, parents separating, or going on holiday. Changes in from term time into holidays and back into term time. All of those things can have an impact on sleep. And from puberty onwards, sleep patterns change very much. This is a time of growth and development in the brain, big changes in the brain, and this has an impact on sleep patterns changing and adjustments again in the child. So teenagers have difficulty getting to sleep, and this is because we have a sleep hormone called melatonin that is released in the brain, and that's what helps us get to sleep at night. So in adults, that the melatonin release is at around 10 p.m. in the evening, but in teenagers, that melatonin isn't released till about 1 a.m. So much later, and this is why this has an impact on teenagers being able to get to sleep. And then because they're going to sleep later, they're waking up, they're finding it really difficult to wake up in the morning and waking later as well. So it has can have a big impact on family life when there's that shift happening. And melatonin release is also impacted by what's happening before you go to bed. So melatonin release is stimulated by being in darkness and turning lights off, things calming down around you. So if you've got lots of bright lights, if you're on the screen, if you're on your phone, on your computer, your tablet, that blue light is not allowing the melatonin to be released in the brain, or impacting on it, reducing it being released. And if there's a lot of busyness going on and noise in the home, or other disturbances, then that all has an impact on melatonin being released. So that's why that time before bed, that hour before bed, is a really important time of quietening things down, calming things down in the home, turning lights down. And it's actually a really key time for preparation for going to sleep. And we actually need to be well prepared so that we can go to sleep and sleep well and have good quality sleep. Sleep deprivation can cause behaviours that mimic ADHD. So actually a child who's sleep deprived might be quite hyperactive and quite agitated, and that will obviously be affecting their educational attainment and their mental health over time. Sleep deprivation leads to problems and difficulties, because if that child is not being able to concentrate, get on well at school, it might be impacting on their relationships, friendships, because of their behaviour. Then it's a bit like a negative spiral, isn't it? And things getting worse. So it can be, so a child who's sleep deprived can have these very hyper and overactive behaviours as well. So it's really important to understand what's going on for that child, to know if sleep, then that can be a key area to address.
It can be a real problem for them regulating their emotions, Catherine, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think, we all know that as ourselves, don't we? If we're sleep deprived, we tend to be more emotional, more up and down, and a problem that you cope with one day, when you feel sleep deprived, you don't feel like you can cope with it on a day when you're sleep deprived, something else that might just seem quite an easy thing to deal with. So it's the same for children.
Absolutely. So really affecting emotional resilience there.
Absolutely, yeah.
For sleeping for children with additional needs. And we can talk about children across the spectrum of additional needs here. So we might be talking about little ones with chromosomal abnormalities, such as Down syndrome. We might be talking about children with mobility issues that actually, require aids to move around. And what do you think might possibly be the additional need for the young man on the right? Pop your answers into the chat. I can't see the chat, Catherine.
Oh, you can't see the chat, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, so generally quite a lot of people are saying ASD. So speech difficulties, communication, yeah, ASD.
Absolutely. So it could be ASD, autism spectrum disorders. You know, it's not always a visible additional need, is it? That's what we're trying to say here, really, with this picture, is that actually that young man, you know, perhaps to other people may not look as though he has an additional need, but that need that he has, that social communication problem that he has, may very well be impacting on his sleep. So we're going to look now at actually what you can do to advise parents or support parents whose children have an additional need to consider the issues that might be affecting their child at night.
So children with additional needs may have additional sleeping issues. And so it's important to be aware of that. But the solutions to helping support sleep are probably the same as you'd be doing for a child who hasn't got additional needs. Obviously, you have to think about the developmental stage that a child might be at, and when the time is what's appropriate for their age. So in a child maybe with developmental delay, you might be dealing with sleep issues, you know, as they're more effectively as they get a bit older. It might be quite hard when they're very young. So it's making those adjustments really for children with additional needs, and being aware of what's going to be right for that individual child. Sleep could be affected due to a condition that they have. So for instance, epilepsy, a child might be having lots of seizures at night, which will be really impacting on their sleep, and they'll be disturbed sleep deprived, and that will affect how they present in the daytime. They might be very tired at school. They might be feeling quite in the, you know, their thinking patterns, they might be feeling quite dull and finding it quite hard to concentrate. Maybe children with neurodevelopmental issues, such as ADHD, obviously with the hyperactivity element of ADHD, they struggle to get to sleep and don't sleep very much, and again then might be very tired in the day, and that'll be affecting on their behaviour and their emotional regulation as well. Disability could be affecting a child's ability to sleep in different ways, and it might be around they're not able to be so active, so they might, you know, not find it harder to get to sleep at night. There could be issues around needing special equipment and comfort that could be impacting on sleep. Certain medications that children are on might affect sleep. If a child's in pain, and that might not be obvious, it might be a child who's got poor oral health and dental decay, and it's not obvious that they've got pain, and they might not be saying they have. So it's important to ask those questions, isn't it, and find out if a child's in pain, that will be seriously impacting their ability to sleep. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Catherine, I was just going to say, if that child has additional needs, they may not be able to express that to you either, might they? They might not be able to explain to you that they're in pain or where it's hurting.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, so there might be other signs and cues that you need to tune into with that child, or use other means to help them express what the problem is, such as drawing or using pictures. Continence and wetting can have quite a big impact. If a child is wetting the bed every night, then that's disrupting their sleep. They have to get out of bed, change bedding, and all of that. And obviously things like skin conditions can cause a lot of discomfort. And at night, when you're in bed and perhaps temperature goes up, skin conditions like eczema can be really aggravated, and it will make it very difficult to sleep with a severe skin condition, or maybe a condition that's not been treated, or the treatment's not being very effective, could have an impact. So if a child maybe had long spells in hospital, that's something to consider. The history, the experiences they've been through. They might have been in hospital where they were woken up often in the night for treatments or for observations to be taken. Did they associate maybe the nighttime with a time of pain, or their separation from the parent again, and have some flashbacks and nightmares about that experience? So that could be something that has an impact on a child who's had to go through a lot of treatment. Most sleep difficulties are caused by learned behaviours and habits. So, you know, parents are the role model for good sleep. and what's happening in the home is very key and very important. And so the routines and patterns that are in the home will have a big impact. You know, if the home is quite chaotic and noisy, it's going to be hard for children to get to sleep. If there's not really a bedtime routine, if children are in the habit of falling asleep downstairs on the sofa in front of the TV, and parents then carry them up to bed, those sort of habits and patterns can develop from a young age and then persist, and can be quite hard to change as children get older. So being aware of those routines and patterns that are happening in the home. If the parents don't go to sleep very early themselves but are up on devices till quite late, you know, children are perhaps aware of that, maybe coming down to see what's going on. So there could be all sorts of things that have an effect on the child. So preparing for bed and sleep, as we've already said, you know, that hour before bed is quite a key time, and it's good to talk to families about that, really thinking about the hour before bed, because they need to identify what is the bedtime that they might be aiming for with their child. You've got, if it is say like 7 o'clock or 7:30, you've got to take back then an hour, 6 o'clock, 6:30, and start thinking about what you're going to be doing in that time before bed to prepare. So turning off devices, making the house calmer, having some one-to-one time with their child, helping them, you know, by reading stories, and having some calming down time, having a bath maybe. Maybe if the child's sort of hungry or thirsty, if there's anything that they need before they go to sleep, although you don't want children drinking lots before bed, because then they're going to wake up to go to the toilet. But sometimes children, if they've had an early tea, they're a bit hungry, just as something like a piece of toast or something, not anything with lots of sugar, making sure they're not having any caffeinated drinks or fizzy drinks. All of those will stimulate, but just some water, maybe a bit of toast if they're a bit hungry at bedtime. And also helping the child to settle, again, is quite important. If they wake in the night, that ability, a child has to learn how to self-soothe and how to take themselves off to sleep. If they wake up and every night they go to the parent's room, or they expect a parent to come to them, parent might be coming in, turning on the lights, maybe taking them downstairs to watch a bit of TV. You know, it's being aware of those patterns that can develop. If a child wakes in the night, it's really important to keep lights off, to keep the house calm, parent to go in and just quietly put the child back into bed, not give the child too much eye contact or stimulation, and leave the child and go back to their room. And perhaps to address a sleep problem, it might take a period of working on that, and a parent having to do that every night until that child starts to self-soothe and settle themselves to sleep. Well, I can see a question's popped up. Do you produce a guide for parents that great bedtime routine is so important? Was that about, have we got a guide? Well, on our website, yes, there is information and guidance about the hour before bed and sleep preparation. So we'll be able to show you a bit about our website at the end. Is there anything else you want to add there, Steph?
No, it's brilliant. So we're going to look at those things that can get in the way of sleep. So we're going to look at the challenges that children and parents may be facing around their child's sleep. So we could have such things as bright light in the bedroom. So as Catherine has already said, use of tablets, use of phones, televisions, just having a bright light bulb as opposed to a dimmer night light, or any light actually, can have an effect on a child being able to settle. Our lovely favourite televisions, which seem to be going into children's bedrooms younger and younger. And we've both, in the course of our clinical work, experienced families where children as young as 2 will have a television in their room, and parents will say that it is because they can't sleep without having a cartoon on or something of this nature. But actually what that is doing is stimulating that child and making it very difficult. So nightmares, a child may be having nightmares or night terrors. And actually we have advice on our website about nightmares and night terrors and how parents can help those. And they can be a very normal part of the developmental stage for a child. But obviously in fact, they're more frightening for parents than they are for the children, because night terrors, a child will wake, but will very, very seldom remember anything about it the next day. But they're very worrying for parents. Bedwetting, as Catherine has mentioned, you know, obviously hugely disruptive to a child who's trying to sleep. Gaming. Use of mobile phones, and you'll see there that we've got 2 relatively young children with a mobile phone there, and that is because, again, we find that use is becoming younger and younger, and parents not always removing those devices from children before bed. You know, it should be a case of an hour before bed, phone is locked in the, you know, the cupboard or whatever, and actually we don't see that again until the next day. So being poorly, as we've already mentioned, going to have an impact. So laptops, so don't think there's many babies using them, but quite like the picture. Just being worried, having worries. Children have worries, and sometimes they find it so difficult to express those, so difficult to articulate what it is they're worrying about. They could be worrying about what's going on at school, they could be worrying about what's going on at home, they could be worrying about what's going on with their friends, but worries are a big part of children's lives. Oh, I don't actually think that picture very well.
That was the sport one, yeah.
Sporting activity, yes. So sport and activity just before bedtime actually releases adrenaline, you know, hypes people up as opposed to tires them out. So, but you know, it's a common belief, isn't it, that if they run around for a while, they're going to get tired and they're going to go to sleep. And then that separation anxiety that we've talked about, that need to be with mummy and daddy, that need to be with someone because I don't like being on my own, it's night time, this is not what I want. And last but not least, we're looking at substance misuse for older children, the use of energy drinks, heavily caffeinated drinks, possibility of starting to use substances other than alcohol or, you know, that sort of thing to try to help to sleep. What we often hear from older teenagers particularly is that they smoke cannabis because they believe that cannabis helps them to sleep at night. And actually what the evidence shows us is that is not the case. The cannabis does not help anybody to sleep. So Catherine's now going to look at some strategies and solutions with you.
I think we've actually missed a slide.
Oh, have I? I'm so sorry.
That's all right, no worries.
There you go, sorry.
That's okay, no worries.
Okay.
Yeah, just following on from, about substances, as again, and nicotine is actually a stimulant. So young people that smoke, nicotine doesn't help you get to sleep at all, but people often believe that if they smoke that having a cigarette helps them to calm down. What it actually does is when the nicotine levels are getting low, someone starts to feel quite agitated and feel like they need a cigarette. So obviously the cigarette does help them to feel calmer because it's addressing, it's obviously hitting the receptors in the brain, which are quite agitated because they're in need of some more, because the brain's in need of some more nicotine. So smoking doesn't actually help people sleep. It actually has the opposite effect. But getting into poor patterns and nocturnal behaviours, I expect, you know, we're all seeing that, aren't we, in young children and teenagers who perhaps on devices, who are perhaps in the habit of doing gaming in the evening and perhaps late and perhaps into the night. And addressing that pattern is quite tricky once, you know, that's quite established for a young person, because obviously it's quite compulsive to doing their games and interacting with other people online. So but it is very detrimental to their sleep patterns, and being able to also not have their phones. You know, teenagers want to have their phone with them 24/7, and often have them with them in bed, and don't turn them off. They don't want to miss out on messages that might be coming through in the night, but all of those patterns are really detrimental, and they need to work towards not having to have their phone with them all the time, and not feeling that they can't live without it there at night as well. Locking them away in another part of the house, turning them off and making sure they're not accessible is helpful if it's possible. We've talked about bedroom environment and light, but also heat. So if the room is too hot, there's not enough ventilation, that will affect sleep, and ideally the room temperature should be fairly cool, between 16 and 20 degrees. So yeah, being aware of that, and also bedding. If bedding is too hot as well, we do actually need to sleep in, you know, relatively cool conditions. We've mentioned about feeling unwell, and obviously in young children things like teething, but in older children it might be problems with teeth and tooth decay and growing pains for some children, nightmares and terrors waking children up as well, which are linked to anxieties and worries that they're possibly having. I think we've talked about most of these, haven't we? The lived experience at home, and see what's going on at home can have a huge impact on children. If there's parental conflict, if they're overhearing arguments, or if there's domestic abuse going on and there's fighting and violence in the home, that's going to be very detrimental for a child being able to sleep. And blended families, changes that have gone on in the family. Maybe the child had their own room and now their parent has moved in with another parent, there's other siblings, they've suddenly got to share their room with somebody else, and sleeping with other siblings, and maybe siblings of different ages, a baby that's waking up in the night, or a teenager that's going on their phone in the night. All of those things can be really have a big impact. And so it's doing that, asking those questions, finding out what's going on for the child to help unpick what might be the cause of sleep problems. We've mentioned caffeinated and energy drinks, but some particularly young people might be quite addicted to their energy drinks and drinking those in the evening. And caffeinated drinks like tea, coffee. Perhaps if a child likes to have a cup of tea before bed, make sure they're choosing a decaffeinated tea. I did talk to a parent recently, and the child was having tea and not being able to get to sleep. So tea has got quite a lot of caffeine in, and being aware of that. Sporting activities, when a child is sporty and perhaps they're doing training and going to their sport clubs, obviously that's important for them, for their well-being, but it's just bearing in mind will have an impact on their ability to get to sleep. So maybe some evenings, if they're doing sports, they need to be aware they might go to bed a bit later, but they might need to think about other ways of getting that sleep. Maybe they need to go to bed earlier on other nights, but I suppose it's just working around that, what's in that normal routine for that child. Okay, we talked about substance misuse, haven't we? So I think we've covered all of that.
Lovely. So now we're going to talk about strategies and solutions. I apologise for jumping the gun. Right. So Catherine's going to talk us through some strategies and solutions, and we're going to be looking at such things as room environment, so being mindful or mindful, family composition, routines and around that, and curious questioning, which is really important actually, because it's very often parents that will report sleeping problems for children or sleeping issues, and actually we need to really unpick that through a curious conversation to get to the bottom of it. As Catherine said, there's so many different facets to why a child may be experiencing problems with their sleep. And actually, often parents will jump to the conclusion that possibly their child does have a social communication problem because they're not sleeping properly. And it's really about absolutely unpicking that to get to the bottom of it.
So I think in asking those curious questions and finding out what's going on, there are some tools you can use. You can think about the bedtime routine quite carefully with that parent, and think about using maybe a sleep diary to help them record what the pattern of sleep is for their child, and maybe record over a week what they do each day before bed, and thinking about that hour before bed, helping them to think quite carefully about what they're doing in that time and how they can make some small changes towards changing that hour before bed, so that they do build in calming time, removing devices, having a bath, having a story, having a good pattern. It's helpful for children to have the same pattern each night, so they know what to expect, and a regular pattern can really help and can really make a difference to a child being able to get off to sleep. You know, and it can be obviously very tricky for children who may be going between different parental homes. You know, they might have half the week with one parent, half the week with another parent, and those two homes are very different. And it's about parents then thinking about how can they try and keep things as consistent as possible for their child, so that the same routine largely carries on if they're in whichever home they're in, and what parents needing to work together on that, which can have its issues, I know. And also you've got to bear in mind parents' perception of the problem as well, and what are their expectations. Are they expecting, you know, their child, you know, as a child gets older, to still be going to bed at 6 o'clock as they did when they were maybe 2, but now they're 8. It's about, you know, parents' expectations. Perhaps all the children go to bed at the same time, regardless of age in a family, and that's not realistic either, or fair on the children. So exploring that expectations of the child, and also tolerance of the parent. You know, is the parent getting quite aggravated, agitated about the child waking up, and are they actually blaming the child? So it's about helping that parent see their role in helping the child sleep, and the things that the parent may need to adjust, rather than trying to expect the child to change. It's about the parent seeing how they can make changes to support their child getting to sleep. So in the bedroom, blackout blinds can obviously be really helpful. I think this time of year when we have light late into the evening, that can also obviously cause quite an issue for children getting to sleep when it's very bright and light. So they might need to think about how they can make it darker in the bedroom. And temperature again. Night lights can be useful, because if a child's afraid of the dark, then a very low light can give reassurance. But again, it's not too bright, so it's important to think about that kind of thing. The hour before bed and making those changes. Solihull programme for parents, you know, signposting parents to doing that Solihull course. They can do that online on our website. It doesn't cost anything. They can put in a code and they can do the Solihull course in their own time and work through the modules. And there's quite a lot of information about sleep in the Solihull course as well.
And if we advise parents, Catherine, on sleep, we generally refer to the Solihull principles, don't we, to do that?
We do, that's right. Yeah, and reward systems can be helpful as long as they're age appropriate. So in younger children, using star charts, it might picking maybe the parent, talking through with the parent how they can use that reward system. It might be about the child actually staying in their bedroom, not keep coming out and coming downstairs. So just one thing at a time with a reward system. You don't want to work on everything all at once, but one thing at a time, and it being age appropriate and time limited, not going on for months and months, but just for a few days. Using a star chart might be a key way to help the child address a particular behaviour. And using positive praise, so focusing on the positive achievements the child is making, looking beyond the behaviour, and understanding why the child is behaving in that way, and noticing when the child's being good, and positive praise again all helps with helping them to get into good patterns for and routines for sleep. We've talked about responsive parenting, but again, very key. What's the parent-child relationship like? You know, is the parent understanding the child, seeing it from the child's perspective, understanding that there might be issues that the child can't change, but the parent has to change for the child, and really hearing that child's voice, how that child feeling in that situation in the home that might be impacting on sleep.
And what that child's perception is of why they're struggling with their sleep, Catherine, because often parents will say, my child is not sleeping. They will then point to a family history, for example, won't they, of ASD or something of this nature. But then actually when the child is spoken to, the child says, Mummy and Daddy argue every night and I can't get to sleep and I'm frightened or I'm worried. And actually it's through the voice of the child that we often really get that lived experience, don't we? We really get that picture of what's going on in the home. So if there's any concerns in a safeguarding way, then they can be, you know, unpicked through that, can't they?
That's right, absolutely. So relaxation exercises and mindfulness, these can be useful for older children and teenagers, and we've got some strategies on our website. for a relaxation is quite simple, really. It's really just taking a child through settling themselves at night, thinking about everything in the muscles groups through their body, relaxing, calming down the brain, maybe listening to calming music, or listening to listening to a story again, or something like that really helps to take their mind off the worries and distract them, but in a positive way. Obviously a few questions are popping through, but shall we talk? I think maybe we'll come to the questions in a minute, shall we? Because I think we've got quite a few questions coming through. So yeah, and mindfulness again is a really good way to help older children, young and teenagers to be able to focus on and settle their mind and their thinking. So if they are getting a lot of worrying thoughts, a lot of agitated thoughts, then it is a really good way to help them to practice and learn how to control their thinking and calm down their worrying agitated thoughts. And the resources, perhaps just better understanding and education about sleep. So using our website and other websites to just get that, helping the child actually learn about sleep and what's happening in their body when they go to sleep, so that they can understand what might be causing them not to sleep. So just that better education about health and about your body and what goes on when you go to sleep can actually help as well. So is there anything else you want to add to that, Steph?
No. Sorry, I'm just done a bit.
Or we come to the website.
Okay, so we have our website, Just One Norfolk, which you may or may not be familiar with. We've placed the 2 links on the PowerPoint that specifically relate to some of the things that we've talked about today. So there's a section for baby sleep and a section for older children's sleep. So we can share the site with you if you would like, or you can access it directly from those links after the session is finished and fully explore it. There's a lot on this, there's a lot to explore. One thing to know about Just One Norfolk in particular is that it's very, very helpful if you have non-English speaking families or families with, language issues, because everything on there can be translated and recited. So not only can it be translated into many, many different languages, it can also be read out aloud to parents as well. So if there's anybody with problems with reading or understanding, then actually they can use the recite me function and it can read out to them, which is very, very helpful. So we've got a slide there for wider resources for you, which will, these are really good researched resources. There's many, many more out there, but we thought we'd put the ones that we felt were most relevant, that would be most helpful for you. And there's tips on there for children, there's tips on there about emotional well-being, but there's also tips on there for disabled children, common difficulties with sleep, and a link there to Solihull. So as Catherine said, there's a few questions. I thought perhaps we go to the questions, and then if anybody wants to look at Just One Norfolk, we could then do that at the end of the session. We can take you through to it. Okay, Catherine, so you've got access to the questions, I believe.
Yes, we probably need to, well, I can see one popping up at a time. If we take the PowerPoint down now, then I think we'll be able to see the chat.
Oh, okay.
If that's all right, Steph. Yeah.
I'm not brilliant at this, as you can tell.
No, it's fine. I think Zoom's a bit different for us, isn't it? Because we use Teams.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not bad on that one, but
right. So I'll go. Shall I go back up and see what their questions are?